Hello, dear ones. It's Reverend Naomi King again. And I had a question that came in this summer from Dan Moore. And Dan asked, why is it that fundamentalists believe in the literal interpretation of the Bible? And there are lots of answers about that could be pretty negative or harsh. And I think it's important before we ask ourselves why anybody believes anything to hold them a little bit in our hearts and imagine ourselves being in that same position, being asked why we believe what we believe. Typically, we believe what we believe because we think it's true and because we want to get things right and because we want to do the right thing with our lives. There are sometimes people who know in the back of their heads that things aren't true, and they go ahead anyway, and that's when we really talk about hypocrisy. But for the most part, the wonderful fundamentalists that I know in my life who believe in literal interpretation of the Bible with no filter, other than the one that they've been taught, but not necessarily see as their own filter, right? That it's a tradition of interpretation that they know and they've received. Believe with their whole hearts, and because they want to be good people. I also know lots of folks like myself and somewhere in between who are also really caring about the Bible in their lives, who look to this wisdom literature to inspire them every day, and who maybe don't receive the interpretation of the literalist tradition. So why would you receive one interpretation and not the other? A lot of that has to do with who loves us, where we grow up, what makes sense to us in our lives, and a sense of responsibility, care, trying to do, again, coming back to this issue of the right thing. So much of ethics and so much of philosophy and so much of the philosophy that's called religion is around this issue of how do we lovingly live in the world? And of course, the challenge comes when we have differing interpretations of what that means. I happen to know a lot of folks who are literal readers of the Bible, literalists, and they know that I'm not. And sometimes this perplexes them. And yet, we find things that we can work together on, such as working against racism, such as working to protect the environment. So here's the thing that's really important to think about if you don't come from that perspective and you sort of lumping everybody who is a literalist together in a biblical literalist together in terms of how you think of the world, is that there are biblical literalists who are environmentalists, and there are biblical literalists who are anti-racists, and there are biblical literalists who are working to save people from human trafficking. And there are biblical literalists who are active carers for the most vulnerable in society, who are out farming in the fields and making wonderful food for you, who are all around you if you happen not to be one, and doing some really good stuff in the world. And there are also biblical literalists, of course, who are condemning gay people like me, who are condemning queer people like me, who are condemning folks for not having a literal interpretation. And honestly, I can hear those same condemnatory tones among people I know who are secular humanists in response to anybody who reads the Bible or any other sacred tradition. I can hear those same tones among the so-called Reformed traditions in the Christian side of things, where if we don't interpret things the way that I interpret them, then somehow that must be wrong. I have to keep coming back with humility, and I return again and again as what does God require of us? Because I do take that question really seriously, as do all my fundamentalist friends and neighbors. And I come back to living humbly. I don't have all the answers. I can't possibly have all the answers, and thank goodness I don't have all the answers, because the world would be a much smaller place. We need the diversity that we have. So I walk humbly, or live humbly. I love the one I understand as the sacred, the holy, and that I call God, and so do many others. And by many other names is known, and also not known and not recognized. We experience the sacred or the sense of holiness in all kinds of places in our lives, depending on our cultures, our received traditions. Again, coming back to who loves us, who shapes us, who creates refuge for us when we need help. And I am called also to love my neighbor, which is everyone, all beings, as myself. And, of course, some of us don't always love ourselves. That's also been part of my journey. So in learning to love myself, I've had to learn to get a lot softer and a lot more curious and a lot more humble, not only about how I ended up the way that I am, but about my neighbors. And so I'm intrigued about why people read their sacred scriptures the way that they do. I'm intrigued about why people don't have sacred scriptures. I'm intrigued about those whose sacred scripture is literally the earth and what grows here, the waters, the air. I want to know more, because this is a marvelous, amazing world. And I also know that when my defenses aren't up, I'm more likely to be able to find my heart connecting to another's, past the politic, towards the actual polis of the people, the P-O-L-I-S. Politics shouldn't have to be a dirty word. It's just about how we govern ourselves. Religion shouldn't have to be a dirty word. It's a way of thinking and a culture and communities that are full of wonder, love, care. And yeah, sure, you're going to find some communities that aren't full of love, wonder, and care. And I find them wherever they've been on the religious spectrum and in the non-religious spectrum. Just as I found love everywhere as well. So I think that's the larger issue for me over how do we read and interpret these scriptures. It comes down to how we love, how we show up for one another and for this planet. And can we, in our diversity, learn to come together and nurture the kind of world that's worthy of all the love that we bear, all the ways that we can be human, all the marvels of this planet and all the other kinds of beings upon it and in it. So that's why, Dan, when you say, well, why do fundamentalists have a literalist interpretation of Scripture? I say, because they want to love God well. They want to do justice. They think that this is how they love their neighbor. And they're trying to get it right. like most of us. I'm hopeful in this election season that more and more of us can start to move past the vitriol, the poison, the anger, the hatred, and the fear that underlies all that. To understand each other better, to be more reverent towards one another and towards the differing ways that we understand this world, and that we can unite to bring more justice, more hope, more peace, more love, and more healing to this planet and to ourselves. Thanks for joining me today.